again. So we've got it apart now a bit. I've given it a bit of a wash. I give it a bit of a degrease and a little bit of a wash, so I could actually see exactly what any problems might be. Obviously, number one, somebody at some point has wrapped up these coolant hoses with red tape all the way around. Every single one is wrapped up. All of them are underneath here and everywhere, so I'm not quite sure what that's for, whether they were perished and they decided to wrap them up with a bit of tape to try and stop them from splitting, or maybe they just wanted to have red hoses but couldn't afford red hoses and so they taped them up. I don't know, I really don't know. You see, when I got this bike, the same as the other bike, I got them and then put them away. I didn't even look at them really, because I didn't have the time or anything to do anything with them. So now I'm looking at these. Now I'm looking at this one. I'm realising it's actually got quite a lot of problems with it. No, so someone's obviously snapped off the little bracket, the housing there, what the reed, where you bolt the reeds in. They've done a little bit of welding there to bolt that one in. That one on the other side's got a nut on it. Got the hoses. The front brake was broken. The exhaust has been welded, but it's still leaking. What else have we got? Ah, the caliper. This appears to be the wrong caliper, I would say, for this bike, given the fact that there's no bracket there and the whole lot moves. It's not bolted onto anything whatsoever. And we've got more. I don't know whether any of you would remember, around about 6 or 7 years ago, I had a KX250 1990 model. So it was older than this one. This has actually turned out to be a 93. If you look at the serial number, it's actually a 93. Can you see the 93 up there? It's actually a 93, not a 92. But anyway, I had to do a clutch lever bracket because on that KX, because that's broken. It seems somebody's done a clutch bracket modification here, because you can see where the old bracket had snapped off from up there. So that's alright, that's handy dandy. I don't really care about that, you know. People have used the wrong Jubilee clips. I mean, I'm a bodger, man. I bodge things out big time sometimes. I don't care, as long as it works. The kickstart's loose, but that's normal. That happens. That's a normal thing, you know. We've got a bolt missing out of the water pump for some reason. Whether it's stripped out, it's more than likely the case that it's stripped out and they just haven't put the bolt back in. Someone's done. It looks like the person that did have this has taken some care, because it isn't. It's as if they've done bits to try and keep it going, because you can buy new clutch covers. Yeah, you can buy new clutch covers for these. I've had a look on the internet and you can get new clutch covers. But they've decided to, looks like they've used some kind of, don't really know what it is they've used, some kind of epoxy or resin or glue or something they've used, chemical metal maybe, not entirely sure what it is, but they've used something along there. This was obviously broken for some reason, and they've bolted it in with 3 nut and bolts, and they've glued around it there to try and seal it up, some kind of sealer. So, you know, if they didn't care, they wouldn't have done that, would they? Probably, I wouldn't have thought. So they've obviously cared about it and tried to fix a few things on it, but you can see the extent of the taped up hoses there. So, you know, that's what happens when you. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, you know. All these things are fixable, and this is a little bit of a project for me. But, you know, if I'd have checked this bike over when I went to pick it up many months ago, you know, then I would have known about all this, wouldn't I? But it was such a good deal, so cheap. I went all the way to Kent. Where did I go in Kent? I can't remember where it was in Kent now. It was somewhere in Kent. Where was it? Come on, think. Snodland. It was in Snodland, or Snoodland, or however you pronounce it. I'm going to say Snodland. Snodland, Kent. So I went all the way there to pick it up. And yet obviously has all this stuff. He didn't start it up, didn't do nothing, but luckily enough it runs alright. It does look like it's had a fairly recent rebuild, judging by the gaskets. You know, the frame is fairly freshly painted. It's obviously got some scratches and wear on it. It's been ridden since it's been painted, obviously, but it's not too bad. For a 93, that's 24 years old. You know, it's probably had a bit of a rough life. It definitely needs new radiators, that's for sure. The radiators have had it. That one's quite bad, I don't know, a bit dark, can't really see. I had a look on the internet for some radiators, very hard to come by the looks of things. Well, there's them hoses. I don't know why they would have been wrapped in, well, that one just felt a bit weird there. What's that all about? What's that hump all about? Don't know why they were wrapped in red tape. I can either only guess two things. One, they were a bit weird and couldn't afford red things, or the hoses were perishing, so they wrapped them in red tape to try and support them. And then the other one's over there. That one's pretty bad and all. So I don't really know why they done that, but let's have a look. These radiators, I think I might better pick the fins out, but they will do the job. But obviously you want things to be cooled as good as possible, you know. You don't want it to run hot at all. We're missing one loafer, or whatever they call loafer. It does look a little bit bent. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is, that's bowed. You can see that's bowed there, look. Which ain't a problem. It does hold water. Is this one bowed? No, that was not bowed. But they do hold water, there's no leaks. Not that there wasn't much coolant in it, but there was coolant in it. It doesn't have any leaks, but you know. So I think I'm going to try and sit there and pick out them fins to see what happens, see if I can pick them out alright. If not, I'll have a look to see if I can get hold of a new rad, a couple of rads. They don't have one. I can't believe that some people think that they only have one. You always have two, there's one either side. If you only have one on your bike, someone's nicked the other one. Crazy.